Smoke drifts over the Pacific coast as the federal government moves to reopen the door to oil and gas drilling where it has long been shut. The state of California is set to clash with Washington once again as the administration of Donald J. Trump, the 47th president of the United States, pushes to expand U.S. offshore energy production, including off the California coastline, a region that has seen virtually no new fossil fuel development since the catastrophic oil spill near Santa Barbara in 1969. On the other side is Gavin Newsom, the 40th governor of California, who has responded to the federal proposal with blunt opposition, declaring the plan dead on arrival. We speak this morning with communications strategist Mark Bednar, former communications director for the U.S. House Speaker, to unpack the economic, environmental and political forces in play. Bednar opens by noting that, in his view, the conversation around offshore drilling has changed. On one hand, he says, just within the last few years, the technology, the practices, the procedures for American oil and natural gas companies has really gotten a lot better. He emphasizes recent improvements in safety and environmental performance. Then he adds, then look at the contrast here. So President Trump wakes up every day to grow our economy, make life more affordable, and to strengthen our national security. And guess what? Drilling and expanding American energy dominance actually helps accomplish all three of those goals at the same time. He argues that Governor Newsom's opposition to offshore production is therefore completely nonsensical. From Bednar's perspective, the question is one of economic burden and energy sovereignty. He notes that gasoline prices in California remain significantly above the national average. In the interview, the presenter shows a snapshot of California retail gasoline at about $4.67 per gallon versus a U.S. national average near $3 per gallon in U.S., with California data 50% higher than the national average. Bednar says that Californians are still feeling the pain of past environmental disasters, such as the 1,969 Santa Barbara spill. Yet he argues the technology has progressed and the state could be benefiting from domestic production rather than relying on imports from Brazil, Iraq, Saudi Arabia or Ghana. Bednar makes a broader claim. Over the course of the last 25 years or so, America has become the global leader in oil and natural gas production, while simultaneously reducing our emissions by about 15%. In that same time, China has tripled their emissions. He uses those figures to argue that expanding U.S. fossil fuel development is compatible with climate goals and economic growth, and warns that the next phase of the socialist push in this country is about this discussion on energy, because it's not about conservation, it's about control. The presenter follows by noting that California is investing heavily in offshore wind, pointing out concerns about wind turbine platforms in the ocean, referencing bird and whale impact, plastic materials and recycling difficulties, and proceeds to thank Bednar for his time. Here's a more detailed breakdown of the context, updated facts, and how they intersect with today's debate. Donald J. Trump is indeed back in the White House as President of the United States. He began his second term on the 20th of January 2025, making him the 47th U.S. President. Gavin Newsom has served as Governor of California since January 2019. No mention is made of the U.S. House Speaker, but Mark Bednar is identified as a former communications director for a speaker, presumably relevant to Washington policy commentary. The federal plan under the Trump administration is to open new offshore oil and gas lease sales on the U.S. West Coast, including 6 proposed lease sales off California between 2027 and 2030. California's shoreline has seen little new fossil fuel infrastructure since the 1969 Santa Barbara spill, which left a durable legacy of environmental resistance to offshore drilling. Governor Newsom has publicly rejected the plan, calling any new leasing dead on arrival. Industry groups say some potential exists in Southern California, where basic offshore infrastructure already exists, but they also note state-level political resistance has kept companies on the sidelines. Bednar points to California gasoline prices being significantly higher. The transcript cites $4.67 gal in California versus about $3 nationally as a reason to rethink domestic production, while U.S. gasoline prices vary. This framing reflects a standard argument. High local fuel costs, plus heavy reliance on imports from Brazil, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Ghana, etc. The broader point, domestic drilling is tied to affordability, jobs, economy and national security. That is Bednar's framing. Bednar states that U.S. emissions declined by 15% over 25 years, while production rose, and that China's emissions tripled, without fact-checking here to the decimal the broader trend of U.S. emissions declining while unconventional production increased via shale, etc., is generally supported by data. What is less clear is whether that supports opening new offshore fields. Critics argue much different risk and context apply off California compared to onshore shale. He introduces the idea that energy debates are less about conservation and more about control, arguing expansion of production is compatible with sovereignty and growth. The host mentions California is investing in offshore wind, pointing to platforms far worse and made of plastic, kill birds and whales. Nobody knows how to recycle them. This raises the question of how fossil and clean energy debates are intertwined. California is indeed advancing floating offshore wind projects and investing in ports and transmission infrastructure for those. The criticism of wind platforms, wildlife impacts, recyclability reflects current environmental debates, though it is a contested framing. The transcript frames the dispute as a confrontation between state policy and canned federal policy. Trump administration. Governor Newsom's posture ties into national leadership ambitions. He has confirmed he will give serious thought to a 2028 presidential bid after the 2026 midterms. On the federal side, the offshore drilling push aligns with the administration's energy dominance messaging, economic security framing and nationalist tone. An open question, will the federal lease sales off California proceed? They are proposed between 2027 to 2030, but face strong legal, state political and practical headwinds, lack of industry interest, infrastructure, constraints. California remains strongly opposed, both for environmental and economic reasons, tourism, coastline vulnerability. The cost dynamic, higher California gasoline prices, reliance on imports is cited by supporters of offshore leasing as a justification. The climate production trade-off, the argument from the federal side is that improved technology and U.S. production have coexisted with emission reductions. The state side would push back that offshore drilling opens new risk, undercutting transition goals. The offshore wind angle, California is investing significantly in wind infrastructure, suggesting an alternative vision for coastal energy. The political dimension. Beyond energy policy, the clash is also part of a broader state versus federal power battle, and each actor, the president, the governor, is operating with an eye toward national positioning. In the narrative of this report, the Biden-era ban on many new offshore leases was reversed under the Trump administration, reopening the potential for new drilling in places long protected, the California coast now one of them. The outcome depends not only on lease sale approvals, but on industry interest, geological feasibility, state legal action, infrastructure costs, and public opposition. For California, the memory of the 1969 Santa Barbara spill remains a potent symbol of the environmental and economic risks communities associate with offshore drilling. Governor Gavin Newsom is thus placing himself firmly in opposition to the federal plan. He has cast the proposal as out of step with California's climate and economic interests. At the same time, President Donald J. Trump and his allies framed the proposal as an opportunity to secure American energy independence, create jobs, strengthen national security, and reduce reliance on foreign imports. Mark Bednar, speaking from the federal economy angle, emphasizes the practical benefits of increased production. He argues that technology has advanced and that opposing offshore drilling is completely nonsensical given high state fuel costs and the broader policy goals of economy, affordability and security. For viewers and readers, key questions remain. Will the lease plan withstand state legal challenges? Will oil companies commit capital given California's regulatory environment and energy transition momentum? What will local communities on the coast demand in exchange for new leasing? And how will this play into the national energy debate between production, expansion and clean energy transition? Ultimately, this episode illustrates how energy policy, environmental risk, state-federal relations and political ambition all collide off the California coast, a place where the scars of the past still influence the politics of the future.